So we're very pleased to have with us here today Zhenmin, the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. And to his left, you have Francesca Perucci, the Chief of the Statistical Services Branch in the UN Statistics Division. And they're here to launch the latest Sustainable Development Goals report. Mr. Liu, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Han. Dear colleagues from the press, I'm honored to be here. This morning, we opened the fourth session of the high-level political forum on the auspices of Harvard ICASOC. So at the opening, at the high-level political forum, I introduced the Secretary General's report, the special edition of the Secretary General report on the progress towards SDGs. Actually, based on that special edition of Secretary General report, we also produced this annual Sustainable Development Goals report. This is SDG report, they call it closer report. This is an annual report. So today, I'm honored to join you to launch the Sustainable Goals report 2019. This report provides a critical look at the progress we are making and the gaps in implementation of the 2030 agenda. It lays out in great detail with the latest available data and visualization. So this, I think, there's this unique nature of this report is the visualization of all the data and with the charts. The path ahead if we are to fully deliver on our commitments. Here are some positive trends. Extreme poverty rate is now 1/3 of the 2000 level. And the fire mortality rate has fallen by almost half since 2000. Close to 120 million children receive vaccines that protect them against measles, polio, and many other diseases. Nearly 90% of the world population now has access to electricity. Around 10% still lack electricity. Yet, not all trends are moving in a satisfactory direction. Climate change continues to be the main obstacle to our shared prosperity. A number of phenomena that be as a result of climate change is still increasing, including rising sea levels, increases in global temperatures, accelerating ocean acidification, and increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters. This is just to name a few. All these are ways in which climate change is fundamentally endangering the health of our planet and the livelihoods of people all over the world. We are seeing more evidence that the impacts of climate change are undermining efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. These impacts may actually undermine the progress that has been made over the last several decades. It is clear that we must reduce the emissions that cause climate change and increase adaptation efforts in order to reach our goals. The clock for taking decisive action is ticking. This report encourages all governments to amplify their efforts towards implementation. The report also shows that inequality is rising and that too many people are left behind. This is another big challenge for the world. The world today is still very unequal and becoming even more unequal. Poverty and hunger are concentrated among the most vulnerable groups of people and countries. Structural disadvantages continue to hinder aspirations of some groups of the population. Until no one is truly left behind, 2030 agenda cannot be considered accomplished. Of course, our prediction that from this year's report that even with all efforts, it might happen that 86% of population will remain in poverty by 2030. So that requires some even more additional efforts. It is therefore imperative for the world leaders to ensure that inequality is reduced and that everyone, regardless of their place of birth, gender, and disability status, has the same opportunities in life. The challenges highlighted in this report are global problems that require global solutions. Of course, many challenges still require the solutions at the national level, but I think for some challenges, they require global solutions. Multilateral actions on climate change, migration, technology, trade, partnerships with all stakeholders are critical. In order for solutions and actions to be effective, we need evidence and reports like the one we are now presenting today. However, reporting is only possible with the data and evidence to inform it. The credibility of this report comes from the robust and sound data that forms its foundation. I think the report we used is official data collected by governments and by United Nations system. I commend the global statistical community coming together to prepare this report. And our statistics division of DESA is Francesca is one of our deputies in the division. We appreciate that our division has been supporting the progress and compiling the data and analysis. So this collaboration of the entire UN system, along with the national statistical systems that underpin the data, is truly exemplary. So let me stop here and take to pass floor to my colleague Francesca to further explanation of some details.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. Good afternoon. Allow me to show you a few highlights from the report. As Mr. Liu mentioned, this is a progress report based on the latest available data on targets, on the indicators addressing targets and goals, and it shows the major accomplishments and the main challenges that are still faced in achieving the goals. It's prepared by UN DESA with data and analysis that are provided by the whole statistical system. All agencies, all international agencies collaborate and provide data in their respective areas of expertise and under their mandates. So the situation on Goal 1, poverty. As Mr. Liu just mentioned, the progress is not happening fast enough, and in fact, the pace of the reduction has slowed, and the 2030 projection puts the poverty rate at 6.0. Also, the estimate shows that there were still 736 million people living in poverty globally, and of these, 413 in sub-Saharan Africa. Similarly, there is not enough progress being made in eliminating hunger. And in fact, there has been a reverse in the trends. There was a positive trends in reduction of hunger, but since 2014, in fact, the number of people living in hunger has been on the rise. And we now have 821 million people globally. In the area of health, we see that there are still 300,000 women dying from complication of childbirth and pregnancy. More resources will be needed, and in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, to step up progress on providing access to skilled birth attendants, which is one of the fundamental interventions to reduce maternal mortality. and especially due to population growth, it's estimated that these resources will have to really be scaled up significantly. Coverage is still only at 59% in the region. Child mortality has declined, and this is one of the positive success stories. We went from 9.8 million children dying in 2000 to 5.4 in 2017. Vaccinations also have helped reduce deaths significantly and have saved children's life, like in the area of measles, in the case of measles. 80% drop in measles deaths between 2000 and 2017. In the area of education, there again, the data don't show a lot of progress, and there are some alarming numbers. There are still 55% of children of primary and secondary school age, corresponding to 617 million, that lack proficiency in reading and math. And these are children that are often in school. In fact, 2/3 of those children are in school, but lack the basic proficiency in reading and math. And when we turn our attention to gender, of course, there are many areas where progress has been made in reducing gaps between women and men, but we still see that a lot needs to be done to achieve the goal. In particular, if we look at decision-making, women are still underrepresented in all areas, and what we show here is the decision-making in the economic sphere. Although the women represent 39% of the workforce, they only represent 27% of managerial positions. We now turn to access to water and sanitation. Again, two fundamental areas that have such a huge impact on all other goals, on progress in many of the other goals, and ensuring people's health and access to many other services. So we see that 785 million people still remain without even a basic drinking water service in 2017. Although this reflects some progress, there was an increase from 61% to 71% between 2000 and 2017. But we still see that huge number of people remaining without basic drinking water services. Similarly, we see progress in ensuring access to basic sanitation, but again, there are people that remain without a service, especially in rural areas. Water stress, that again is a very alarming number that we see. There are 700 million people that are predicted that could be displaced by 2030 because of water scarcity where they live. And currently we see that the population in the countries that are affected by high water stress total 2 billion. So we see 2 billion people living in countries where they can face that huge risk. We now turn to another critical area. As Mr. Liu just mentioned in the opening remarks, one of the main challenges of achieving progress, of making progress and achieving the SDGs is represented by climate change. We see that the material footprint is rapidly growing, and in fact, if no urgent policy interventions and concerted actions are taken, it's predicted to reach 190 billion metric cubes in 2050. CO2 emissions continue to grow and is now at 146% of the pre-industrial level. And we see that reflected in increased ocean acidification. And we see that is up 26% from pre-industrial times, a very alarming number because of the huge consequences, not just for the life in the oceans, but also for the role that oceans can play in mitigating the effects of climate change. And we've seen, for those of you who were at the HLPF session earlier this morning, the importance of maintaining, preserving species, and the risk of species extinction has actually worsened by almost 10% over the last 25 years. Now, in the area of prosperity, we look at access to electricity, another factor that is so fundamental to ensuring people's access to many other services and a full and productive life. We see there's been progress. 9 out of 10 people worldwide have access to electricity. And in fact, international financing for renewable energy is also rising sharply. So another positive message there, up to 18.6 billion. So some real push in improving and expanding renewable energy. Since the economic downturn of 2009, labor productivity has increased. So again, this is a positive trend. Although I must say, disparities are striking across regions. We go from 0.3% productivity in sub-Saharan Africa to 4.8%, the highest value in Central and Southern Asia. So huge disparity there. And in the area of slum and urban living conditions, we see that, in fact, although there was a positive trend for until 2014, from 28% to 23% decreased in the population living in slums, the positive trend has now reversed, and the percentage is up to 23.5% in 2018, which corresponds to the staggering number of over 1 billion people. And of course, another big challenge in the achievement of SDGs is growing inequality, and that again was mentioned many times, including earlier this morning during the discussion with member states. And you see that reflected in many countries. We see an increasing share of income going to the top 1%, while the bottom 40% receive less than 25% of overall income. And lastly, let me turn to the area of peace and partnership. Just a few highlights here. We see a growing number of trafficking victims being recorded and being detected around the world. This both reflects a better reporting system, so more information on who's been trafficked and the number and the gender, etc. But it's also probably a reflection of actual increase in trafficking of people. And of these, of course, 70% are women and girls, and most of these are trafficked for sexual exploitation. We see that birth registration, although is a basic human right and is fundamental to ensure access to basic social services and legal justice, is still not universal. In fact, it's far from being universal. Only 73% of children under 5 are actually registered worldwide. And another series of numbers that don't show a very encouraging picture are related to official development assistance. We see a decreasing trend for total official development assistance, and even more in the case of least developed countries, and even more pronounced in the case of Africa. And you see that from 2.7%, a decrease overall, 3% for least developed countries, and 4% in the case of Africa. And that is reflected also in the lack of funds for statistics. And as Mr. Liu mentioned, without data, we cannot provide the necessary numbers, the necessary information for policy making and to track progress. And data are largely underfunded. And in fact, in sub-Saharan Africa, less than 1/4 of national statistical plans are fully funded. So those countries are not able to produce the data they need to inform their policies and to monitor progress. And only, in fact, 0.3% of ODA goes to statistics. And that number needs to at least double if we want to have the data we need to inform the necessary policies and to ensure that we leave no one behind and we have data that cover all segments of the population. Access to internet is also another area where we see huge disparities. We have over 80% of people worldwide are online, compared to only 45% in developing countries and only 20% in the least developed countries. So these are just a few highlights, but I would encourage you to visit the website where we have the report, and we also have an interactive version of the report we call the SDG story map that shows more data and in an interactive format. And this is the website where you find all the information about the indicators, how they are compiled, the methodology, and all the efforts behind putting together the framework. Thank you.
I'll now open up the floor for questions. Please identify yourself to the speakers. And first goes Edie.
Edith Lederer from the Associated Press on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Welcome and thank you for doing this briefing. The Secretary General himself has been pushing for, since he arrived, the two big issues that you talk about, climate change and inequality. Not with great success. How do you expect the world to actually address those two challenges and the many other discrepancies that we still see in reaching the goals by 2030? And in all of the statistics, what really surprised you most that has changed, that you see changing either positively or negatively? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Edie, for the question. Really, I think Secretary General Antonio Guterres has paid high attention to the two issues, both climate change and the issue of inequality. For climate change, I think I should say that this year's report will have a much better reflection of the current assessment of the global assessment, because we take a lot of data from the recent IPCC report. So climate change, I think, really is the most challenging issue for the world. That's why Secretary General is initiated and will convene his climate action summit in September. This is a summit initiated by Secretary General himself. I think the objective is to raise the awareness and also to encourage member states to raise the ambition based on their commitments in accordance with the Paris Agreement. So it's challenging to be, according to the IPCC report, the decade before, until 2030, it will be the last window opportunity for the human beings to control the temperature increase below the 1.5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. That's why I think if we cannot do that, then definitely this temperature rise will exceed 1.5 degrees, will reach maybe 2 degrees increase. Because Last year, there'll be already the overall assessment will be temperature increase reached to 1 degree above the pre-industrial levels. So there's a little space for the human beings to take action. So it's that's why I think for the UN system, we need to prepare to promote for clean development, for green development, and for low carbon development. Of course, objective to achieve the certain goal for the carbon neutrality by a certain date. Of course, the Secretary General pushing for whether we could achieve by 2030 or not. Maybe that's difficult for a number of countries. But how about we could achieve carbon neutrality by 2050? So definitely this would be issue which will impact survival of humankind. I think inequality is still a big issue. It's been not an issue for the income and living conditions. But you see the fourth industrial revolution, the new technology, rapid development, new technology, it might help to narrow down the gap of inequality, but it also might help to widen the gap. The digital divide might be continue to increase, widen. So that's why I think in the next decade, we are implementing 2030 agenda. We should continue to highlight the issue of inequality between the countries and within the countries. Thank you.
Okay. Tarek?
Thank you very much, Undersecretary General. And please, my name is Ahmed Fari, American Television News. At the outset, I wish to commend on the great work done. I know how challenging it can be collecting statistics from all over the system and the member states. Yet it remains a question about the integrity of the data, since as statisticians, the ins and outs and the tricks of the industry is no secret no more. And all these countries can window dress the statistics to suit their political agendas and their image in the world. The second part is that so far the SDGs have had mediocre results. If not any, is it expected to be like its predecessor, the MDGs, which we didn't really get the objective from it? And with regard to climate change, you mentioned inequality. If for a country living in a dire conditions and the population living in a dire condition when there is lack of industries, when we tell them about the green economy, how basic they need to be. The problem is in the more developed countries. I see that there is a variance between these objectives, and there is also a section which I hope to see financing for the SDGs. How much have been raised to finance this ambitious plan? Thank you.
The first question. I'm
Yes.
going to pick up the second question.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. The integrity of data, that is, of course, fundamental. And we do an immense amount of work, starting with the global statistical community. That's the community that takes care of the standards and the principles for the data collection and the data production in general. And we are led by what we call the fundamental principles for official statistics. But that's only the sort of tip of the iceberg. What we do and what all the chief statisticians around the world do together is also to work on quality assurance framework. And of course, nothing is perfect, but I would say that official statistics provide the sense, the guarantee of the best data that you can put together. We also have new data sources that come from new actors, new data communities, but those also, once they are integrated in the official statistical systems, also go through a rigorous system of control. What you raise is that some governments might tweak the data for their own policy and political sort of reasons. The data that we compile are data that are compiled by the international agencies. So they are the international data series, which go through another level of sort of quality control, and that is that those data have to adhere to international standards and definitions. So what you see in this report is based on agreed international standards to the largest extent possible. So are data that are collected from the countries, but they are compiled for international comparison. So they are sort of adjusted and standardized to allow comparison aggregation and to take care of some of the quality issues that you mentioned. Perhaps I quickly address the question before, what surprised me? If surprise is a word, nothing surprises me because I deal with this data also sort of on a daily basis. So you see the slow change or the new data coming in. But in reading the report at the end, you know, what you see and what somehow is to some extent discouraging is to see that some areas where we saw a lot of progress between 2000 and 2015, let's call it the MDG period, a lot of those areas you now see the progress has actually slowed. So that is what somehow surprises you, between quote unquote, in the sense that you would expect that to pick up after 2015 in some of these, especially some of the new areas that have been expanded, etc.
What areas?
Well, some I mentioned, like in health, in poverty. We've seen some of those indicators, even thinking adolescent fertility, where there was a lot of progress being made, and it started to decelerate. So some of the areas where a lot of actions were being taken have slowed.
To respond to the second question raised by a colleague from Egypt. MDGs was formulated for developing countries. That's why I think some lessons have been drawn when the member state decided to formulate the SDGs. The SDGs should be a global agenda, should be an agenda for all member states. I think that be also one of the experiences that have been drawn from the MDGs, because for some assessment they be accomplished, but for some assessment not fully accomplished. That's why I think when member states, when they are had a final evaluation for the MDG, they should have a global agenda for the 2030 agenda for all member states. So SDGs, I think that this is most important global consensus that be benefit not only for the developing countries, also for the developed countries. For Secretariat, we are working with OECD and with the European Union. I think they also recognize that the SDGs are important for all the developed economies. So SDGs is global agenda. So that's why I think also a lesson learned from the MDG process we should really review the progress every year and review every progress for every SDGs yearly to ensure that there be good progress every year, to ensure that no one be left behind. That's why I think the big difference from MDGs and SDGs from MDGs be principles to leave no one behind. To leave no one behind, most importantly, to leave no country behind. That's why I think this is a very important principle. Of course, the SDGs criteria are very high. I think if we achieve SDGs, really, this world more or less get into another stage of implementation of development, because in parallel with the 2030 agenda, we are also confronting the fourth industrial revolution. infrastructure. So this is a period really to promote and to achieve clean and green development. Green development. It's not an issue. I think it's not an issue whether your choice. This issue, I think, could be obligation for all member states to achieve the green and the clean development. Otherwise, the CO2 emissions will continue to increase. I think we are going to confront more challenges by 2030 for the climate change. Of course, for achieving the SDGs, even in the 2030 agenda, financing the SDGs and the technology support for the SDGs has been also high priority. But financing really challenge itself. So the current challenge we have confronted there's people we have been told that in this world is not the issue of lack of money, but the lack of interest of investment, especially lack of interest investment in the South, in developing countries. So I think in the process of implementing 2030 agenda, we need to encourage member states and to mobilize the international community to create a favorable, friendly international environment as well as national environment for attracting investment. That's why I think the Secretary General also at the forthcoming General Assembly, we are going to convene a high-level dialogue on financing for development. Objective also to mobilize investment in SDGs. I think for this high-level dialogue in September, this will be not a dialogue just for member states. We're also going to invite different stakeholders, including private sector and big companies for investment. So now issue will be for financing for development is to be how you mobilize the investment in SDGs, especially investment in South, because the current flow of capital will be remaining among big countries, among the Europe, North American markets, and among the developed economies. So we need to really encourage the investors, especially private investors, to be going to invest in SDGs. If you invest SDGs, I think if we help all countries achieve the 2030 agenda, there would be a different world for all. They will have better opportunity for your investment after 10 years. Thank you.
Planning.
Yes, yeah, it's under the health goal. There are data on maternal mortality and family planning and adolescent fertility and some of the indicators, and some of the detailed indicators are on the website that are not entirely reflected there because of space. Yeah. Some are, and some are in the database.
Ellen Wolfhorst with the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Given the significance of climate change, could you elaborate a little bit on how climate change affects the other SDGs, and most specifically, does the problem of climate change threaten their overall success?
Of course, climate change, I think, most direct impact is SDG 2, that is direct impact on agriculture. You know that and our report you will see in our SDG 2, it's surprisingly that every SDG there good progress, but in SDG 2 end hunger, there have been no good progress because there's an increase as compared with 2015. After 2 years, the people confronting hunger increased from 784 million to 821 million. This is, I think, this is a tragedy for the international community. But this happens mainly in Africa, mainly Africa. Africa, I think, some areas have been affected because of the climate change. I think because of the very severe drought and other disasters, the harvest not so good. So this is one of the area. Of course, there were a factor of water scarcity. Water scarcity has been an issue confronting international community for decades, but if climate change is going to continue to worsen, then water scarcity issue would be deteriorating. Thank you.
Hi, Frankie Ciarda from TRT World. 3 quick questions. First of all, in your report, you had noted some statistics regarding the killings of human rights workers and journalists. Can you review that for us, those numbers? And also, in terms of the human trafficking numbers, which countries did you see a dramatic increase in the human trafficking? And thirdly, given the recent attacks on multilateralism, do you see that making your job a bit harder in achieving the goals you're after?
Okay, so, sorry. The number of cases of killings of human rights defenders, that's the indicator you are referring to. So the increase was from 2015, those are the numbers we show in the report, to 2018, from 314 to 358 for men and from 49 to 39 for women. There hasn't been a huge increase in the 3 years overall, and there was a decrease actually in 2017 and then up again significantly.
What about the journalists?
I'm sorry?
How did the journalists that fall into that
These
number?
are together, yeah.
Can you separate them at all?
Yes, you can separate them, and those are in the database, but they are shown together in the report. Yeah.
Any particular country that more likely to occur in?
No. This is the number reported globally. We don't show the number by country in the report, but you can access that on the website, on the database. The reason why we don't show countries, because the global report is supposed to show the global picture without pointing at specific countries. The reporting at the country level is owned by countries themselves, and those are the numbers reflected in the national reports, in the national data platforms, and to some extent in the voluntary national reviews in the VNRs when those are informed by data.
In terms of human...
So human trafficking, the numbers, as I said, are on the rise, although the estimates and the assessment by UNODC, which is the agency that is responsible for compiling those data, is that to some extent those numbers, the higher numbers, also reflect the improved reporting systems. As you can appreciate, it's a phenomenon that is quite hard to report, to record, and to have complete numbers on. So agencies and governments are making efforts to improve their reporting systems. That's why you also see somehow increased level. But the sense is from different studies is that can also be a reflection of actual increase in trafficking. It's hard to exactly distinguish the two trends. And in fact, yesterday UNODC also launched their new report with the new data that are going into a lot more details on this particular issue.
What about specific countries?
Again,
as an increase?
we don't show the countries in the report.
Is that because it's too politically sensitive?
Because the report on the SDGs, the global report, is the mandate for which we have, we produce the report, and national reporting is owned by member states. Each one has their own reports, and we work very closely with many of them, especially in the developing regions, to assist them to put together their national reports with all global indicators to the extent that they can produce data for the global indicators, and also additional supplementary national indicators. So those are reported at the national level.
Yes, I think actually in connection with the implementation of the 2030 agenda, definitely I think this is an agenda for the national governments. But at the same time, I think on many issues we should continue to enhance international cooperation. I think some issues we must be addressed globally, a global solution is required, like climate change. But even in many areas, I think even not specified in the SDGs also requires some international cooperation. For example, migration. I think migration used to be the issue just between the countries, but now the big problem I think we need to really improve international cooperation to address the issue, to avoid the illegal, irregular migration, to ensure that the regular, legal, and ordered migration would be really contribute to the achievement of 2030 agenda and to achievement of the sustainable development in all countries. Because demographic change also big issue confronting this world. Many developed countries, will get into era of aging. They need labor. Then in the South, there's also a dramatic increase of the youth force. So they need international cooperation. So I think that in many areas that we need to continue to encourage and promote international cooperation. So multilateralism would be, I think, the basis for achievement of the 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ying Chen from Hong Kong Phoenix TV. My question is about the poverty. Several months ago, there was a UN report indicates that in the world, not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries, there's a high rate of poverty, like in the United States. Did you have a similar findings in your report? And also you mentioned that there's a high rate of poverty reduction this year. So the reduction happens mostly in developing countries or in developed countries. Also, I read the poverty. Yes, and also I read the national profile of this report online, which shows that China has two positive trends in reduction the poverty. So how would you evaluate this performance as well? Thank you.
Thank you. The indicator in the SDG framework is extreme poverty, which is the below $1.99 a day. So it does not necessarily apply to developed countries. All countries, not just developed countries, also measure poverty based on their own national poverty line. Some countries also measure based on a multidimensional index. There's the index of deprivation in some of the OECD countries, the European countries. So I imagine the report you've seen refer to some of those other indicators that are not included in the global SDG monitoring. That doesn't mean that countries do not use them to address their own priorities in the context of the SDG of the SDG framework in the countries. So we see a lot of those data being used for national monitoring. They're not reflected in the global report. The global report uses exclusively the extreme poverty line, so it would not be comparable with the data that you are referring to. But yes, I've seen studies pointing to increased poverty in some of the developed countries. And in fact, the OECD report that was presented this morning also had some alarming figures on inequality, rising inequality and poverty in some of the OECD countries as well.
Jim?
Yes, Joseph Klein of Canada Free Press. I just want to explore with you what might appear to be some tension between the Goal 8, which includes sustainable economic growth, and Goal 12, sustainable consumption, with respect to the least developed countries. In your write-up on Goal 8, you said that the least developed countries grew by 4.8% annually between 2010 and 2017, short of the 7% SDG goal, or target, which I believe the report says may not be attainable. In the write-up on Goal 12, and particularly looking at page 47, there's a chart which shows that I assume the least developed countries would include countries in Eastern and Southeastern Asia, which you discussed in Goal 12. There you see a one-third increase in what you call domestic material consumption, which you want to lower. To what extent is there some tension, at least in the short run, to promote GDP growth in the least developed countries, but decouple it and try to discourage their domestic material consumption, which includes, as you point out, outsourcing of material and energy-intensive stages of production from high-income nations to the less resource-efficient countries. Thank you.
This is not about China.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, we're just discussing here, but you're referring to Eastern and Southeastern Asia. It's not necessarily least developed countries. In fact, some of these countries are...
I'm sorry, but in your write-up on page 47, you talk about trying to, that the increase in domestic material consumption, you define that, to meet the demands for goods and services from within and outside the country, accounts for about 2/3 in the increase at the global level. And these countries, I don't know to what extent any of them are considered within the least developed country grouping, because you don't correlate the two. But I'm just trying to explore the tension between the goal to increase significantly the GDP growth of the least developed countries and then discourage this outsourcing because of its impact on domestic material consumption of countries, at least in the ones you point out in Eastern and Southeastern Asia.
Yes, I was just pointing out that in Eastern and Southeastern Asia, you don't have least developed. Many are not least developed countries, so it's perhaps less of a tension in that sense. But of course, there is a tension in ensuring growth and also maintaining and promoting sustainable consumption and production patterns. And that there are a number of recommendations, I believe, on that point also in the...
Well, would they be in sub-Saharan Africa? Because again, you see on
Sub-Saharan Africa, you'll see more of the least developed countries.
But there on page 47, you also see growth between 2010 and 2017 in domestic material consumption.
Yeah.
So
yes,
again,
of course,
I'm just trying to ask you to explore how we can reconcile, at least in the short run, the goal of significant GDP growth, and we'll say the lesser developed countries, including the least, and their reliance, at least in the short run, on extraction of natural resources and outsourcing from the more developed countries.
Yeah, well, we don't go into policy analysis in the report, and there are no policy recommendations or sort of guiding in that sense. Although we try to make links across the goals, when it comes to issues like recommendations or assessment of what directions countries should take to ensure how to address tensions like this, that is more, some of this is addressed in the special edition of the Secretary General's report that goes more into actions and recommendations in that sense. But I'm not sure if it's to the level of the details that you would like to explore. So the report doesn't really go into that level of specific policy. It's not, let's say, prescriptive in terms of policies. It just provides the data and the assessment based on the official indicators.
But there are some points. I'm just going to make this very quick observation. There are some points where you do say that GDP growth and domestic imprint should be decoupled. So
yes.
you are making certain policy release recommendations. So I'm wondering how that relates to what my question.
Well, we don't say it should be. What we say is that exactly what you say, that there is a tension that we need to, for goal 12 to be achieved, there has to be a decoupling of those two. And we don't get into the specific of providing policy recommendations. That's what I'm saying, that countries should follow in order for those trends to be compatible and for goal 12 to be achieved.
Stefano?
Yes. Thank you. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York and Radio Radicale in Rome. I think the elephant in the room at the moment is number 13, climate change. Okay, the choice of the number is really unfortunate because in America, number 13 is an unlucky number. They don't even put the floors in hotel number 13. I don't know if you know that. I come to the question. You say, the Secretary, you say that practically we have the money, we have the technology, we have every resource, we have everything. What we don't have everywhere is the political will, right? Now, how you convince government? There are government that you just have to convince the government. That's it. I will say Chinese government is convinced, I believed, because you are also here. I know that you don't represent here the Chinese government, but you are in a position where it shows that the Chinese government is committed to this. But another very important, as important I will say, actually in this case even more important than China, is United States. United States, you don't just have to convince the government, you have to convince the people, because it's the people that change the government. So my question, goes specific, is this. How are we going to convince the people that number 13, if it's not rich, like you say, is going to, I don't know, in poker you will say, well, oh no, I don't want to go to poker, but the point is that everything is useless here. If you don't reach number 13, we're talking about nothing. You say that practically. So what is the strategy here to convince the people of the United States, not the government, the people, that what we have to do, we have all resources and everything, is to reach that goal? You have an idea?
I have an idea. You could help. Media could help. So we ask the media for help. Help us to promote and raise awareness of the climate change to the public, that be with not only governments or the whole humanity should be mobilized, united to tackle the climate change. Otherwise, I think we are going to confront more challenges in the forthcoming decades. So media could do it.
I have a follow-up, very quick on this, just what you said. I suggest that you are the Secretary General, when you deliver this, and you tell us that even we reach this, so it's the end of everything, you should not deliver like sitting like you do. You should maybe stand up on the table, standing, really, making news. Go on Times Square, do something. The point is the message is not going through. You have to change strategy.
No, I think it's actually United Nations is a member state-driven organization. So the member states decides everything. Secretariat, we are providing, for as secretariat people, we are providing advice and policy support to the member states. Report we are producing to share with member states. This is a scenario, this situation you need to confront. It's for member states, you should mobilize that you tackle these challenges. But I see, that's why I think your media really could help. Your media. I think if your media could really highlight the issue of climate change, I think it would be helpful. That's why Secretary General, I think he needs your support. I think that he is convening for the September Climate Action Summit. It will be convened by Secretary General himself. It will be by the UN system, by the Secretariat, not by member states. That's why I think the Secretary General realized that's a big issue. We should be mobilized from a Secretariat point of view. Because for member states, they have these conference parties to the Convention on Climate Change. They have their intergovernmental process. That's why I think we, the people, we should be united to do that, depending on our different functions. You, the media, should support us. Thank you.
Badi?
Thank you, Farhan. Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary General. Thank you, Madam. I think what my colleague Stefano Vaccaro, I believe, was trying to say is that we need some new ideas. Eliminating abject poverty, climate change, development, international cooperation, talking about the political will, have been the subject of debates in the decade of 60s in this organization. Now we all suddenly discover that climate change implementation of its goals is related and linked to inequality. Inequality is nothing new either. Statistics don't tell all the stories. Inequality is also linked to the concept of social justice. Do you think that this dimension, social justice, should be part of your report? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the report does make a good effort in addressing some of the issues you raised. Of course, a big limitation is data, the data availability, but most of the work we do in our Department of Economic and Social Affairs is try to, and in particular the Statistics Division, is trying to improve data on those particular issues to address inequality and social justice. There are a lot of new data sources, citizen-generated data provided by other data communities that can help. And so our hope is that more and more our report will reflect those elements and will be able, not just in the global report, but also some of the thematic reports that are being produced on SDGs and by the various different constituencies can address those issues. We have Goal 16 that has some indicators that can give us a sense of social justice or issues that were raised earlier, what happens in some of the regions of the world. But again, a big limitation is still data in for some of those indicators.
Actually, let me follow up. We do not, in the report, we do not use the concept of social justice. But actually, we are promoting social inclusiveness. Actually, I think that to promote the inclusive social development would be a big issue for us. Let's say in the 2030 agenda, in achieving the 2030 agenda, if you look at how we could achieve the eradication of poverty, SDG 1. Actually, that will not be entirely achieved just by economic growth. Because in some circumstances, you need the right social protection system. That's why I think for the United Nations, we're also promoting and encouraging member states to establish, improve their social protection system. So they should be prepared to really provide the protection to this last group of the poverty people. That this group of people, poverty people, who will not be able to benefit from purely economic growth. That's why I think this will be part of the social justice, I think. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'd like to, again, thank our guests, Undersecretary General Liu and Ms. Perucci. And I'd recommend that you all look at the report, which is a very helpful resource. Also, please stay in this room because after this, we will hear from the spokeswoman for the President of the General Assembly, Monica Villela Grayley. Thanks very much.